Why M? Like, what was the
You wanna
origin?
know why?
Yeah.
Because 50 can't rap. And so I gotta go a level up and challenge the better rapper.
Internet has been uncertain about, to the point where they be like, man, the game is lying about.
What?
Have you ever heard people say this on the internet?
Yeah, all the time, bro.
Crazy that Ye did more for me in the last 2 weeks than Drake did for me my whole career.
Although, in 2019, Game called him a talented rapper with a melodic.
All right, check it. The Game was once hailed as the savior of West Coast rap, the dude carrying Compton on his back, bringing that raw street storytelling to the mainstream with his classic debut, The Documentary. With Dr. Dre in his corner and a quick stint rocking with 50 Cent and G-Unit, he had the streets, the charts, and the whole industry lit. For a minute, it really looked like Game was about to cement himself with the legends. But then, the cracks started showing. Instead of staying locked in on the hits, he got caught up in constant beefs, public feuds, and drama that overshadowed the music. He was going viral more for rants, name-dropping, and social media stunts than he was for actual chart dominance. Behind the scenes, it got even darker. Multi-million-dollar lawsuits drained him. Unpaid judgments took his label and even his home. The internet started clowning, saying, "Game be lying," and it stuck. What should have been a celebrated legacy started looking more like a cautionary tale. Now fans see a West Coast legend fighting just to stay relevant, watching the empire he built slip away, from platinum plaques to repossessions. The Game's downfall might be one of hip-hop's coldest tragedies. The Game still stands as a certified West Coast legend, no doubt about that. But lately, a growing wave online says he's fallen off in terms of respect, both inside the hip-hop community and with some of the peers who once stood beside him. That narrative really started gaining steam after two major moments, two high-profile exclusions that had fans questioning just how much weight his name still carries in the culture. First, fans couldn't help but notice the Game's absence from the 2022 Super Bowl halftime show, a monumental moment for Los Angeles that brought together West Coast giants under the biggest spotlight in the world. Then not long after, he was once again left out of Kendrick Lamar's celebrated pop-out Ken and Friends showcase, a cultural moment where Kendrick united some of the coast's most important figures. The omission stung even more because of their history. Kendrick's very first live performance was with The Game, and the two had collaborated in the past. Naturally, people expected to see him there. Instead, social media was flooded with questions about why he wasn't included, sparking heavy debate. Eventually, Game jumped on live to address the situation himself, brushing off the speculation and trying to downplay the snub. Game went live, stressing that he still sees Drake as his brother and Kendrick as his homie, trying to keep it all love on the surface. But then he dropped a bombshell, claiming that if he really wanted to, he could have owned half of Top Dog Entertainment. That statement alone had the internet raising eyebrows, with many calling it a bold, maybe even unbelievable flex. And when you zoom out, the bigger picture of the West Coast dynamic starts to matter even more. It ain't just about individual friendships, it's about the politics, the alliances, and the shifting power that define who gets called up for the culture's biggest moments. While the Game's absence definitely stood out, it's worth noting he wasn't the only heavyweight missing. Even Snoop Dogg, a cornerstone of the West Coast, wasn't there. But in Snoop's case, it was nothing deeper than scheduling. He was booked for a show in Canada that same night, while the Game was right there in Los Angeles. That difference fueled even more conversation. And if you look further back, the tension in this circle didn't just come out of nowhere. Back in 2015, Drake pulled up to Kendrick Lamar's own backyard in Compton, filming a video with the Game. To make it even spicier, Drake used that moment to take shots at Kendrick, stirring the pot and creating an undercurrent of drama within the West Coast scene. To really understand how the Game's choices shaped his relationships with longtime allies, you gotta look at the chain of events. Like 50 Cent once said, the Game has always been inconsistent with his words and his actions. That reputation for unpredictability became a trademark, and in many ways, it defined how his career played out. His story kicked off when Dr. Dre discovered him after hearing a run of mixtapes that showed raw talent and potential. Impressed, Dre signed him to Aftermath Entertainment, setting the stage for what would become a monumental debut. Together, they locked in on records, and soon, the Game dropped his breakout single How We Do, a track that set the tone for the classic album The Documentary and marked his official arrival on the big stage. How We Do lit the spark, and by the time the documentary dropped, the fire was unstoppable. The album debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200, moving a massive 586,000 copies in its first week, with production from giants like Kanye West, Scott Storch, Timbaland, and of course Dr. Dre, plus heavyweight features from Eminem, 50 Cent, Nate Dogg, and Faith Evans. The project was stacked from top to bottom. Overnight, The Game wasn't just another rapper. He was a certified star and the new face of the West Coast. But even with all the accolades, Game felt like he wasn't being given the credit he deserved. That frustration bubbled over, and instead of riding the wave with G-Unit, he flipped the script, sparking a feud with 50 Cent that would change his career trajectory forever. That fallout with 50 Cent cut deep. It left the documentary as The Game's first and only release under Aftermath. By the time his follow-up, Doctor's Advocate, dropped, it came through Geffen Records instead. Early on, Game hyped it up, claiming Dr. Dre would be involved in the project, but when the album finally arrived, Dre's fingerprints were nowhere to be found. Later, Game doubled back, admitting not a single track was actually produced by Dre, and going as far as to say they'd never collaborate again. That shift in narrative made the rift between them undeniable. On the title track, Doctor's Advocate, Game poured out the pain of that broken mentorship, sounding like a student left without his teacher. A West Coast prodigy suddenly forced to stand alone. Game later opened up about just how complicated his relationship with Dr. Dre really was. In an interview, he admitted he never actually thanked Dre for changing his life. "I probably said good looking," he explained, "but I never said thank you. Where I come from, we don't talk like that. Gangster rappers don't say the kindest words." That raw honesty showed the gap between mentor and protege. For years, the two weren't seen together at all, adding fuel to rumors of a permanent fallout. But then, out of nowhere, a photo surfaced online. Dre, Snoop Dogg, and The Game standing side by side. It was a rare moment that suggested maybe, just maybe, time had smoothed out some of the rough edges in their relationship. By the time the R.E.D. album dropped in 2011, it seemed like the door with Dre wasn't completely closed. Dre contributed in subtle but meaningful ways, handling several elements of the project, from skits to tracks, and even lending his voice to narrations about Game's parents and his Compton upbringing. Those personal touches gave the album a sense of authenticity and connection to Dre's legacy. Meanwhile, the lead single Red Nation featuring Lil Wayne helped stamp the project with mainstream appeal, showing that even with all the turbulence, Game still had heavyweight backing and the ability to make noise on a major scale. Everything between them seemed cool, at least on the surface, until the 2022 Super Bowl halftime show in Los Angeles. Dr. Dre curated the lineup, bringing out Eminem, Mary J. Blige, 50 Cent, Snoop Dogg, and Kendrick Lamar. But The Game, nowhere to be found. That exclusion cut deep, and for Game, it marked a turning point. Instead of brushing it off, he fired back publicly, claiming Dre had never actually given him any beats for the documentary. That statement reopened old wounds, stirring controversy around a classic project that had long been seen as Dre's stamp on his career. Then he took it further, arguing that Aftermath wasn't really responsible for his rise at all, and boldly insisting that Kanye West had done more for him in just 2 weeks than Dre had done over his entire career. After that, Game doubled down and took things even further, dropping a full-on diss track aimed at Eminem called The Black Slim Shady. On the record and later in interviews, he claimed he was the better rapper, dismissing Eminem's music as overrated and even saying his songs don't get play in clubs. The contradiction was glaring though, because a decade earlier, Game openly admitted he wanted no smoke with M, calling him too dangerous of an opponent to go against. Now he brushed that off, saying his perspective had changed and the past didn't matter. He made it clear that the diss wasn't random, it was sparked by Dre's decision to leave him out of the 2022 Super Bowl performance, reigniting old resentments and pushing him into one of the boldest moves of his career. Game later clarified that the Eminem diss wasn't really about a lyrical rivalry, it was more about loyalty and pent-up frustration over being snubbed by Dar. What stood out though was his refusal to go at 50 Cent in the same way. He brushed it off, saying 50 can't rap, which surprised a lot of people considering that just a few years earlier in 2019, he was praising 50's melodic style and calling him a talented rapper. That kind of back and forth has become part of Game's reputation. Bold statements one moment, contradictions the next. And yet, even with all the downplaying and dismissals, he's also admitted in recent interviews that meeting Dr. Dre was a life-changing moment, a pivotal point in his journey, even if he continues to minimize Dre's role in shaping his career. From a young Compton prodigy mentored by Dr. Dre to a global star with the documentary, the game had all the tools to carve out a legendary legacy. But beefs, contradictions, and controversy turned his story into one of hip-hop's most debated cautionary tales. Once seen as the face of West Coast revival, he now stands at a crossroads, still respected for his raw talent and undeniable impact, yet questioned for the choices that cost him alliances, credibility, and stability. Whether remembered as a fallen giant or a flawed legend who fought to the end, the game's journey is a reminder that in hip-hop, success isn't just about talent, it's about discipline, respect, and the bridges you choose to build or burn.